Solving the dialectic relationship between environmentalism and economic development has been one of Xi's own theoretical contributions to Chinese socialist doctrine.
In essence, the new development philosophy's objectives are anchored in innovation to give China a competitive advantage, balance inequalities between the country's regions and social groups, forge harmony between nature and humanity, and continue to promote common prosperity for all.
In this new episode, we're going to talk about China's economy over the past decade under the guidance of Xi Jinping Economic Thought. So Rick, what do you think is the biggest change in Beijing in terms of its development in the past 10 years?
Well, Sylvia, life is more convenient. The sky is bluer and people's incomes have greatly increased.
Right, I think it can also summarize partly the change of the country as a whole. Our experts have also shared their keywords on China's past decade.
I would say increase in the income of the population and transition towards high technology, high-end growth.
It is unprecedented. It was astounding. And I think it was a game changer for the world as well.
Rick, I think our experts have inspired me. Why don't we use several keywords to summarize the hallmarks of Xi Jinping Economic Thought?
No, that's a great idea. I've always wanted to know more about it. In fact, my thought is it's kind of like a steering wheel, guiding the direction of China's economy. So a key word, what would be the first key word that you would choose?
I'm writing down. New development philosophy was officially proposed by Xi in 2015. It has become the core of Xi Jinping Economic Thought.
That's right. It features innovative, coordinated, green, open, and shared growth.
You got it right. It emphasized the 5 important aspects of China's economic development. I also want to introduce high-quality development because in 2017, Xi made the judgment that China's economy was transitioning from rapid growth to high-quality development.
Well, let's see what some experts have to say about this.
Well, it's probably the core, yes, in as much already that it has been named Xi-economics. And this is a very typical and I think well-describing name of what is happening now in China, the shift that takes place in the Chinese economy.
Well, the main thing by high quality is that it means that you're no longer satisfying the basic needs of life of the people. They now have new needs. They need higher education. They need greater leisure. They need greater cultural facilities. They need improvements in the all-round conditions of life. For example, China did have a problem of pollution, and the high-quality growth is now eliminating these. And so, therefore, President Xi Jinping had to put forward the questions to deal with this new transition.
Rick, talking about Xi Jinping Economic Thought, I think there is one thing we have to mention.
Okay.
Common prosperity.
To me, that means development for all, not just a few people, and it's one of the aspects of the new development philosophy.
Right, it also includes balance between different regions, groups of people, among others.
Because although there was great development of China's economy, there was also problems of inequality in China. And the idea of common prosperity precisely outlines that the majority of the people must benefit. Now, that includes specific measures to deal with the poorest people, such as the elimination of absolute poverty, but it also means the increase in the living standards of the average people in China. This is very different to the United States, where the majority of the population has not had an increase in its income for 10 years.
Rick, I'm sure you must be very familiar with one sentence President Xi said on many occasions: the people's aspiration for a better life is what we're striving for. I think we can say what happened in the past decade was extremely impressive. About 100 million rural residents were lifted out of poverty, and rural residents' per capita disposable income more than doubled.
Okay, let me guess. The next key words would be people-centered development philosophy, right?
Yes. And it is very easy to understand to put people first.
That means that the criteria for progress is not how much concrete is used or how much steel is used, but how much is the living standard of the population improved. And I think that applies in all fields. It's obviously clear in the case of the pandemic, where China has prioritized saving people's lives. And in the capitalist countries, they place as their top priority the defense of capital. It is a joke when the Western countries say that China has a bad human rights record and they have a good one, when they've allowed 4 million people to die in their countries and over 1 million in the United States, and China saved people's lives. China's human rights record is obviously much, much, much better than that of the United States. Secondly, it's put people first in terms of the increase in living standards, in which, as I said, the per capita GDP of China has grown 5 times as fast as the United States. And then China is making the transition exactly to ecological civilization, as Xi Jinping puts it. China is now the world's leader in how to deal with global warming. Therefore, there's an all-round improvement in the conditions of the life of the people. That's what is expressed in real terms, what a people-centered development means.
If you compare the people-centered philosophy of China with what they call also people-centered development strategies in the West, it's like day and night. People-centered in the West is based on a propaganda slogan of people-centered. Basically, it's business and profit-centered, whereas in China, it is really people-centered, where the final benefits to the people.
Well, Sylvia, I have written something that is about a hot topic worldwide, and that is China's dynamic zero COVID approach.
There are discussions on whether China can overcome the current economic difficulties and emerge even stronger from it.
Well, China, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, is determined to contain the virus while maintaining economic growth. And to me, this is the best approach.
In President Xi's words, it's about coordinating the epidemic control with social and economic development. I think this is a fine demonstration of Xi Jinping economic thought, which always puts people and their lives first.
I agree.
Because it's best for the economy, because it means that most of the economy is functioning perfectly normally. Whereas in the Western countries, the COVID is spreading enormously through the country. Therefore, you've got all sorts of shortages. China will come through this exactly the way that it's done in previous crises, because its socialist system is stronger than a capitalist system. China can control the investment in its economy. Whereas in the West, all those investment is taken by private individuals and private companies. That means if China's economy slows down too much, it can particularly undertake infrastructure and other investment, but infrastructure is a very important part of this, whereas the United States can't. For example, in the international financial crisis, over the 5 years, investment in the United States fell by $500 billion. And this is because the American private companies didn't want to invest, and therefore the economy went into a deep recession. As President Xi Jinping put it, China has not only the invisible hand of the market, it has the visible hand of the state. So this is exactly it. China has got much greater policy resources than any capitalist country has.
It's a difficult situation because aside from the COVID, you have this geopolitical infection. But I think that President Xi and the leadership has the ability, the knowledge of overcoming these problems and to steer the ship through these stormy seas so that we can all get to the port safely.
Rick, see the skyline behind us. Such prosperity from Beijing and all across China, I think, is partly attributed to globalization. And China has benefited so much from free trade and has continued to contribute to world economic growth.
Well, my guess is the next thing we're going to talk about is globalization.
I will be very careful using the term globalization, because by globalization, Western style has very little to do with benefits to the people. And therefore, I think if we talk about globalization, I would like to call it globalization with Chinese characteristics. I think he is brilliant in many ways, and one of the ways is he's very inventive. He comes up with new ideas, and like the Belt and Road is also his initiative. This is brilliant because it has almost unlimited potential, because it is based on a growth which is not necessarily manufacturing. It is based on a growth of connectivity, not just connectivity through physical projects, but also through interchange of science, of research, of education, of cultural exchanges, and all of that linking up people. I think this is very important, and especially makes the difference to Western globalization also. These countries maintain their sovereignty and will have their autonomous political and philosophical and scientific and social principles maintained, and at the same time developing economics directly through projects, physical projects, or indirectly by bringing people to a higher level of understanding each other and a higher level of education, so that they by themselves will develop internally further growth motives and further socioeconomic development.
I think what China has initiated was something called Globalization 2.0. We had until now, globalization as it was first developed was really the idea that capital can move throughout the world. And it did. But what it did not do, it did not assure development for all the countries that were touched by this capital investment. And a lot of countries, of course, rejected this globalization because they were on the backside of it. They became, to some extent, the victims of it. China, with this idea of win-win cooperation, has introduced a new form of globalization, a globalization which is all-inclusive. President Xi has emphasized, and it's most specific in the BRI cooperation, that there has to be, that the other side has got to win as well. And the idea of China was, of course, that development is not sending care packages. Development is bringing infrastructure, in particular transportation infrastructure, to these countries, because that creates the basis on which their own economies can develop. You don't send them fish, you teach them how to fish so that they have their own way of doing it. Or as the Chinese phrase is used, the notion of common destiny. As the Chinese saying goes, we're all in the same boat. And if we want to reach the other side of the river, we got to, begin to row together cooperatively in order to do that. This, I think, is the most important element that President Xi has introduced into the global vocabulary, which must become the guiding light for how international politics in relation between nations must conform.
The past decade was fruitful under the leadership of President Xi Jinping. China bid farewell to absolute poverty and has attained a moderately prosperous society in all respects.
And now China has pledged to continue to promote common prosperity as it is developing into a modern socialist country.
See you next time.